want to welcome our witnesses here today, and thanks very much for coming, gentlemen. And with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Powers and Mr. Boisseneau from the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs. 10 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. My name is Paul Boisseneau, and I'm the Fire Chief for the County of Brant, Ontario, and I'm the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs First Vice President. On behalf of the CAFC and our Chief Fire Officers and firefighters from across Canada, we want to thank the committee for the opportunity to present the perspective of first responders on the transport of dangerous goods and railway safety. The tragic derailment in Lac Mégantic has focused attention on the impact of dangerous goods, incidents on public safety, and the environment. The Lac Mégantic Fire Service and their mutual aid fire departments did an outstanding job in dealing with the largest, most destructive dangerous goods incident in recent Canadian history. All of us here have the shared responsibility of mitigating the risks associated with the transport of dangerous goods in Canada. To do so, we need a system with preventative measures and protections, including legislation, but also inspection and enforcement, information sharing, training, as well as safe operating practices that ensure safe communities. The goal of our testimony is to broaden your understanding of the composition, abilities, and needs of the fire services across Canada, as well as our recommendations and actions. In the Canadian Fire Service, a significant number of fire departments in Canada share one important characteristic. Railway lines run through the communities that they protect. When an accident occurs, they will most inevitably be the first responders on scene. Now let's put that into context. There's approximately 3,500 fire departments in communities of all sizes across Canada, of which 3,200 are volunteer fire departments. Of the 120,000 firefighting personnel in Canada, 80% are volunteers, meaning these men and women with their full-time jobs and family obligations who volunteer to help protect their communities. With the diversity in size, resources, and responsibilities of these departments, dangerous good hazmat response is only one of many emergencies fire departments must prepare for. Our hazmat dangerous goods training is most frequently based on the National Fire Protection Association, NFPA, 472 standard for competence of responders to hazardous materials, weapons of mass destruction, incidents that have 3 levels of training and competencies. First is the awareness level, operations level, and the technical level. Due to the high cost of training requirements, most fire departments do not operate beyond the awareness level, which basically gives them the ability to recognize hazardous materials, protect themselves, call for trained personnel, and secure that area. In rural areas, the gaps in training and resources are understandably much wider. Fire departments rely heavily on the Emergency Response Assistance Plan, or ERAPS, the holders, to provide the special technical expertise, logistical, and tangible resources to help us mitigate an incident. Last week, the CAFC applauded Transport Minister Lisa Raith's announcement that the Government of Canada will now require ERAPS for the shipments of crude oil, ethanol, and other specific flammable liquids products by rail. This will result in first responders having access to specialized response capabilities when responding to these high-risk dangerous goods incidents. This was a key recommendation put forward by Canada's fire chiefs as part of the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Advisory Council and the ERAP working group that we participated in. The establishment of a task force to review ERAP requirements and the application is an important step in improving emergency response systems in Canada. As we move through this process of addressing classification and ERAPs, we believe there are various components to that system that will require further discussion and action to mitigate future incidents. Dangerous goods response requirements. To evaluate what is required to manage dangerous goods incidents, emergency response planners consider several key aspects: information, training, resources, and planning. For the benefit of the committee, we want to focus on a few programs and ideas with these areas that we believe are particularly relevant. Information sharing and Canutech. We first consider information and the vital resource that is the Canadian Transport Emergency Centre. Canutech is critical for the emergency response and planning in Canada, especially in rural areas. Canutech is the equivalent to a first responder calling 911 for dangerous goods incidents. Its industry-leading emergency response guide for initial reference and its experienced 24-hour-a-day professional chemists assist emergency responders with advisory and regulatory information in the event of a dangerous goods accident. We cannot stress enough the importance of maintaining and, frankly, strengthening this service in order for first responders to continue to protect Canadians, the environment, and themselves. While it has been suggested that individual municipalities should receive real-time data from the railways on trains scheduled to transit their community, we believe this would be unrealistic and largely futile exercise given the thousands of train movements daily across Canada, 99.9% of which occur without incident. However, when a derailment does occur, the fire service needs immediate access to the train manifest information, as well as the material safety data sheets, the MSDS, and contact with remedial measures advisors, RMAs, having specialist knowledge of the dangerous goods involved. This is the role Canutech can play and must play for all municipalities, and this is where the CAFC believes Transport Canada has a critical responsibility to assist first responders in safely mitigating an incident. In training, until the Lac-Mégantic tragedy and subsequent incidents in the U.S. and Canada, the dangers presented by large quantities of crude oil had not been recognized as an area where special training and equipment would be required by municipal firefighters. It is imperative that we provide firefighters with the appropriate training and equipment for these types of incidents. The CAFC has worked with various industry stakeholders to help develop and promote training programs for fire departments, municipal officials, and emergency planners. This has been included firefighter training by CN Rail on incident command at derailments, the Chemistry Industry Association of Canada and its Transportation Emergency Assistance Program, as well as the Fertilizer Safety and Security Council in the development and distribution of training programs on anhydrous ammonia. Flammable liquid firefighting requires special training and equipment not included in earlier programs. This now must be developed using a national standard program and delivered effectively across Canada. The CAFC is actively working with its stakeholders to further enhance promotion of these resources to our members, as well as the development of new programs. To reach the thousands of firefighters with a basic awareness level of training, we believe that using a web-based program will be the most effective means of delivering this information. Additional advanced hands-on training is necessary and should be coordinated with the railways and fire services on a regional basis to maximize the number of firefighters that can be included with the capacity of training resources available. Resources and planning. When we talk about resources and planning, two main issues arise from discussions with our members and our stakeholders: access to organized resources and standards for coordination and planning. A critical point that needs to be recognized as part of the risk assessment and planning process for these emergencies is defining the operational capabilities that are required. These operational capabilities will be based on three key technical elements. First, the amount of Class B foam concentrate that is available to suppress the vapors or extinguish the fire. Second, available water resources or supplies to make finished foam, recognizing that Class B firefighting foam streams consist of 94 to 97% water combined with the foam concentrate. And third, the foam education and application devices and apply the foam streams onto the hazard. To successfully apply the foam onto the fire or extinguishment requires trained and competent responders who can size up these scenarios and perform the required tasks. On the planning side, we believe standardizing an incident command system process for railway incidents is required to coordinate emergency planning and identify the roles and responsibilities of municipalities, railways, producers, and the federal government. Jurisdictional issues and conflicting priorities should be identified and resolved as part of the emergency planning function and not during an emergency incident. A clearly articulated system that's based on a changeable, scalable response organization providing common and predictable hierarchy will make for a more efficient and effective collaboration and response to incidents. Resources for ERAPs. The CSC believes that mutual aid approach with all shippers and carriers participating would be the most cost-effective and efficient means to deliver resources needed to assist first responders. The Western Canada Spill Service, WCSS, and the Liquefied Petroleum Gas Emergency Response Corporation, LPG ERC, are two examples of this very approach. In conclusion, we believe that the systematic approach outlined here is required to address the evolving risks associated with the transportation of dangerous goods in Canada. As the voice of the Canadian Fire Service, the CAFC is proactively seeking opportunities to find collaborative solutions and best practice. We were proud to actively participate in the TGD Advisory Council and to lead the Emergency Response Assistance Plan Working Group. We have engaged the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers and the Railway Association of Canada to initiate longer-term projects to identify gaps, as well as align resources and planning to mitigate future risks. We will diligently work through Transport Canada's newly established ERAP task group, and with the Government of Canada, this committee and all members of Parliament to strengthen rail safety across Canada. On behalf of Canada's emergency responders, thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to taking any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Mr. Boudreau. And now move to the Freight Management Association of Canada, Mr. Robert Ballantyne. 10 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Freight Management Association of Canada was formerly the Canadian Industrial Transportation Association until this year, and we've been representing the freight transportation concerns of Canadian industry to various levels of government and international agencies since 1916. The 90-plus members of FMA spend approximately $6 billion annually on transportation services by all modes, and we do advocate for our member companies' interests regarding air freight, trucking, marine, and rail. And as background, I am a member of the Transport Canada Advisory Committee on Rail Safety, representing the shipper community. The role of the Advisory Committee relates only to the Railway Safety Act and its regulations, including SMS, and does not generally deal directly with TDG issues. And while the committee's, your committee's mandate from the minister is to consider transportation of dangerous goods and safety management systems in all modes, my remarks will focus primarily on rail freight. Before addressing the specific topics, I would like to offer a few general comments about transportation safety. Number one, by any reasonable standard, modern transportation in all modes in the Western world is very safe. Number two, as long as there is movement controlled by human beings, there will be accidents. Number three, safety can never be taken for granted and vigilance can never be let down. And number four, there is always room for improvement. The Canadian Transportation Safety Regime, that is the policy, the laws, the regulations, enforcement, accident investigation, and practice, focuses on prevention of accidents, and this, of course, is the right emphasis. The recent Lac-Mégantic derailment was a tragedy, and the work by all stakeholders in both Canada and the U.S. to take actions to minimize the possibility of another such accident has been intense and thorough. As the Transportation Safety Board continues its investigations, it is expected to make further recommendations that will lead to even more improvements. While many of the recommendations and subsequent actions of the Minister have focused on prevention, there is a tendency by both media and government to focus on, quote, the next Lac-Mégantic. And by that I mean that considerable activity is focused on the characteristics of, in this case, the DOT 111 tank cars, to make them more robust for the next big accident. Such accidents are extremely rare, and that needs to be considered in any actions that the government decides to take. The last accident that came even close to Lac-Mégantic was a derailment of propane cars with some other DG cars, including chlorine, on the CPR in Mississauga on November 10th in 1979, nearly 35 years ago. In that accident, no one was killed or injured. There was limited direct property damage, and about 250,000 people had to be evacuated for several days. Transport Canada and the railways learned significant lessons from Mississauga, and the result is that there has been no accident as severe as Mississauga on either CN or CPR since that time. There, of course, have been other derailments, and some of them have been relatively serious, but nothing quite to that magnitude. The Transportation Safety Board is the scorekeeper with regard to accidents in aviation, marine, rail, and pipeline, and the statistical trend in all modes is uniformly in the right direction. So now looking at the TDG Act, the evidence is that the TDG Act and the regulations administered by the TDG Directorate are generally working well. And there continues to be a downward trend in the DG accidents, even with increased volumes of these dangerous goods. The Minister has asked your committee, quote, how Canada's TDG regime compares with that of the United States, unquote. The Minister's recent actions announced on April 23rd provide some insights into the working of the TDG regime here compared to the U.S. The ability of the Minister to quickly issue protective directions pursuant to Section 32 of the TDG Act when there was danger to the public indirectly indicates that it compares well with that of the U.S., where rapid response seems to be somewhat more difficult. While mandating the specifications of the DOT 111 tank cars and requiring older models to be removed from service is important, the most important follow-on work should be prevention. The Lac-Mégantic accident was a runaway train of 72 cars that derailed at a speed well above the allowable track speed. And if the cars had contained only grain, there still would have been significant damage to the heart of Lac-Mégantic. The immediate focus of the TSB was on actions to prevent runaways, and this was, of course, the correct immediate focus by the Transportation Safety Board. In this connection, the Minister announced last week that DOT 111 cars used to transport crude oil and ethanol that do not meet the CPC 1232 standard set by the Association of American Railroads in October 2011 must be phased out or retrofitted within 3 years. Just to give you some idea of the size of the fleet, there are currently about 1.5 million freight cars of all types in operation in North America. And virtually all of these are able to move between all railways in Canada and the United States. According to the AAR, included in this 1.5 million car fleet are 228,000 DOT 111 cars. 92,000 of these are used to move flammable liquids. As of last fall, 14,000 of these cars moving flammable liquids were built to the new 2011 standard. And the Railway Supply Institute reports that an additional 30,000 compliant cars are expected to be built by the end of 2015. This will leave a significant shortfall of car capacity to move flammable materials, including crude oil and ethanol. There is provision to retrofit the older cars to bring them up to the current standard. However, there is not enough North American capacity to build or retrofit enough cars to meet the 3-year timeline. As these cars move cross-border, it is imperative that the regulations and timelines be harmonized between Canada and the United States. Turning now to the Railway Safety Act and the safety management systems, the RSA is an enabling legislation for safety management systems, and it is useful to understand the philosophy and context that the RSA provides. This was one of a series of laws passed in the final third of the 20th century that ended the long, dark night of oppressive regulation on the railways. The RSA places responsibility on railway management for safety, provides for relatively rapid rulemaking by the industry to facilitate the introduction of new technology and operating methods, but gives Transport Canada very strong powers to protect the public interest. The RSA also provides a significant role for organized labor to participate in the rulemaking process. The RSA became law in 1988, and the first rule submitted and approved under this new act in 1990 was the Canadian Rail Operating Rules. This was the first significant update of these fundamental rules since 1962. These are the basic rules that train crews and other operating employees must follow for safe train operation. I was directly involved in this and subsequent rule engineering standard submissions throughout the 1990s, so I am familiar with that rulemaking process. The introduction of SMS in 2001 was a logical extension to railway safety culture, and it facilitates improved oversight of railway by the Safety Directorate at Transport Canada. SMS has been successfully implemented on all the major railways, including the commuter railways and on the short lines. The Class 1 carriers have more extensive and complex operations than short lines and have more depth of resources to implement SMS and to provide the required data to Transport Canada. SMS, of course, will be much more complex on the Class 1 railways than on the short lines that may only have a top speed of 30 miles an hour. In 2013, the Auditor General undertook an audit of Transport Canada's administration of SMS. In its report, the Auditor General validated the basic philosophy of the RSA and SMS and stated as follows, quote, "Safety risks are inherent in all modes of transportation, and rail is no exception. Federal railways have the primary responsibility for managing these risks and ensuring the safety of rail operations, while Transport Canada plays a key role in advancing safety of rail transportation, specifically by maintaining a regulatory framework and overseeing the federal railways." End of quote. The Auditor General's report identified issues that need improvement by Transport Canada related to data gathering, the number of audits undertaken, development tools to assist inspectors, and skills development. And Transport Canada has responded positively to the Auditor General's recommendations and has set timelines for implementing the changes that were recommended. In answering the 3 questions on SMS posed to you by the Minister, I offer the following comments. SMS implementation in the railway industry is well advanced, and Transport Canada is addressing the recommendations of the Auditor General, especially to increase the number of audits. While it's difficult to determine specifically how SMS has improved transportation safety, this is number 2, the TSB statistics indicate continuing improvement over the period that SMS has been implemented. 3, on the question of additional methods to improve SMS, continued education, training both within the railways and in Transport Canada will be needed as SMS evolves. Oversight by Transport Canada needs to be robust, not only by the audit function, but also with continuing inspections. And where the carriers are found to be deficient, Transport Canada needs to take strong action, including imposition of administrative monetary penalties. Safe transportation is vital to the Canadian economy, and members of our association are ready to work constructively with the government and the carriers to improve the safety of Canadian supply chains for the benefit of everyone. And I would be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ballantyne. Now from Teamsters, Mr. Phil Benson, 10 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Phil Benson, lobbyist, Teamsters Canada. With me is Mr. Rex Beattie, President, Teamsters Canada Rail Conference, Locomotive Engineers. Mr. Bill Burrell, President of Teamsters Canada Rail Conference, Maintenance of Way, couldn't be with us today. My prayers are with him. Railways have been self-governing and self-regulating without meaningful supervision or inspection, conducting their business behind a wall of secrecy. Safety management systems so secret that the MPs, the public, even us, can't see them. Are you surprised there is no safety culture at railways? You know it, and Parliament has acted by unanimously passing, by voice vote, the amendments to the Rail Safety Act. Inspectors and auditors are ready. Workers will have a direct line to Transport Canada to report safety violations. Unions will take part in developing all components of safety management systems and will sign off on it. Workers are not inattentive, they are fatigued, and will welcome fatigue management based on science. We recommend the current rulemaking process change. The rail sector should follow the rulemaking process of all other sectors. The Advisory Council to the Minister of Rail Safety should vet and recommend rules. Like other sectors, exemptions should be rarely granted, if at all. We recommend that safety management systems, audits, safety violations, and the resolutions all be made public. The public has a right to know. After the tragedy of Lac Mégantic, the delayed Rail Safety Act regulation process is moving forward. Next year, they might clear the approval process, and it might be years before the safety management systems and fatigue management is in place. This is unacceptable, and we strongly recommend it be sped up. Companies and unions should immediately commence discussions on both factors. The direct reporting line to transport rail safety should be put in place yesterday. After Mississauga, the transportation of dangerous goods is something all sectors do well. ERAPs and knowledge of dangerous goods transited through communities remain an issue. Without knowledge of what dangerous goods are in transit, first responders cannot be repaired. Even with knowledge, long response times are possible. A glaring problem is that of our First Nations. They need to know and to participate in all discussions, a problem shared with smaller towns, especially regarding resources. We recommend that ERAP discussions be expanded and cities and towns and the public be given access to the information of dangerous goods in transit through their communities, reserves, and nations. Crude oil has a UN designation. Diluted bitumen and Bakken are not crude oil. Dilbit may have environmental issues, but I am not sure that explosion is a product of concern. Bakken oil can contain more than 30 psi of gas. It would not be transportable by pipeline. If Bakken is like a gas, it should be treated as one and transported as such. The new .111 cars may not be adequate according to the TSB, and the acquisition of what may be inadequate .11s is dismissed through cost concerns. The industry does not want to deal with these issues. Teamsters, myself, spent many years dealing with the post-9/11 crisis when the government, industry, and unions worked together because they knew they had to restore public confidence. It was inconvenient, costly, and business as unusual. Lac Mégantic is rail's 9/11. I do not see any desire by the rail industry to work in any meaningful way to restore public confidence. It is business convenient, at no cost, as usual. Teamsters Canada is Canada's transportation union. Moving oil by rail or pipeline is in our interest as long as it is safe to the public, the environment, and our members. Our recommendations are to help get the public license to move oil, consistent with government policy. We have confidence in Minister Lisa Raitt. She knows her files and is moving forward. Help her move quicker so we can work with her and you to make rail transportation as safe as possible. The following are the comments of Mr. Bill Brell, President of the TRC Maintenance of Way. They're the people who look after the tracks, infrastructure at CP, and most of the short lines in Canada. We are understaffed, overworked, and we are tired. Many working 10 to 12-hour shifts 5 days a week, then traveling hundreds of kilometers home on our own time. At home, we have a handful of hours with our families before having to turn around and drive hundreds of kilometers back to the job. Our work shifts change regularly between morning, afternoon, and night, sometimes all within the 5-day cycle. A personal comment for me, that is a clear violation of fatigue management science. This has been going on for months. So far this year, we are told it will continue for the rest of the season. There are other cycles, more humane cycles we can work. However, current management has decided to experiment with this new cycle, which practically eliminates any proper rest. Seemingly with no concern to our fatigue, our ability to focus, or for safety, we're constantly told by frontline supervisors that production is all that counts. Human beings aren't built for this. We break down, we become fatigued when there's no attempt to manage it. We can lose focus, we can lose lives. When the vast majority of mainline derailments are caused by infrastructure or equipment failure, don't you think that the men and women maintaining these tracks should be properly rested? The railways do not share their safety management systems with us. We have no education concerning what these systems are, let alone how they manage safety. We need this information shared with the workplace health safety committees. Ask yourself, who's better to look after the safety of the track than the people on the tracks? The way to achieve safer railways is through regulation, education, communication with all stakeholders fully involved. We are proud Canadians. We're hardworking, loyal employees, many second, third, and sometimes fourth generation. We want and need Canada. We want and Canada needs a safe and productive, viable railway system. Mr. Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. I don't have any written notes to pass out, so this is ad lib. So I just want to talk to you what it's like to be a railroad in Canada these days. So let me start off by saying that I represent 99% of the operating crews in Canada, which is the locomotive engineers, the conductors, yardmen, etc. We represent the main carriers, Canadian National, CP Rail, Via Rail, Bombardier, the GO trains in Toronto, etc. So we have a vested interest in the safety and the movement of goods. But a lot of people don't understand what it's like to be a railroad. So I'm going to walk you through a trip so you really get a sense of what we deal with. And so what we do is we leave from what's called a home terminal where we live. And most of the time those trains are scheduled. In other words, we have an 8-hour window where we know that we're going to go to work, and we can prepare ourselves for that as far as rest is concerned. Thereafter, we're on that train in a cab that's 12 feet by 6 feet, a minimum of 10 hours, most cases 12 hours straight with no breaks. You're not allowed to stop and have lunch. That train has to move. When you get to the other end of the terminal, the other end of the road, in some cases as far as 300 miles away, what happens is you go into an unassigned type service. You do not know when you're coming back. And so, for example, you go off duty in the morning at 8 o'clock after working all night, and you don't get called right away. And you don't get called right away because of the way they operate their trains. You're not entitled to book rest except at that initial time. So even if you booked rest, which is a maximum of 8 hours, after 8 hours, you're subject to call. And what takes place is you might not get called for another 8 hours. In other words, just when you're ready to go back to work and there's no trains, you're sitting there for another 8 hours. Now you get called to come back to work. You cannot refuse that. You must now come back, and now fatigue has set in. And these crews coming back, they now have to work 10, 11, 12 hours with no breaks moving these trains. These trains now, when I hired on in 1973, these trains were roughly maybe a mile long. Some of them were up to 2 and even 3 miles long. There used to be crews of 4-member crews. Now they're 2-member crews. The management style of the major freight railroads right now is very Machiavellian. And what happens is we work on what's called a Brown system of demerits. You get up to 60 demerits, you are discharged from the service of the company. That's what happens. And so when you take a look at the Canadian Railway of operating rules, there's very little that can happen on the property that you can't point to an employee failure somewhere. So that's the reality of the life on how we operate. The problem is that the companies, the discipline that is assessed, they don't want to have the employees discharged, but they rather have you up around 50, 55 demerits. Why? You're more apt to do is what you're told, because you're subject to being discharged if you get 10 or 5 or 10 more demerits, because it puts you over the 60. So it's very Machiavellian on how we operate. And then you take a look at the stress of the crews. I don't know if you know that within labor law, we have what's called the do now, grieve later. You cannot refuse. Other than issues of safety, you can't refuse. You must go to work. Right now, we have thousands and thousands of grievances against the company moving its way through an arbitration process. And just to let you know, there are 2 arbitrators that sit 3 days a month, 11 months out of the year. 3 days a month, that's all they sit. And they virtually hear every case of every railway union and every railroad in the country. So if you think you have a grievance and you think it's going to progress in your lifetime to arbitration to get it resolved, give your head a shake. It's not going to happen. So this adds to the stress. They've done a study, the railroads, on retaining employees. If they can get an employee to be on the railroads for up to 5 years, they're locked in now because they're vested within the railroad, whether they have mortgages and families and so on. And so they're in a situation where they can't leave. But it's very hard to retain employees right now under this system. Just take a look at the moving of grain, the problems of moving of grain. A lot of it is you don't have manpower to do it. So this is the environment that we live in. And when I sit and I see this type of committee where we can have our voice, the first responders are the crews. They're the first responders. Because when that train derails, and I've been in derailments, when those trains derails, I'm the one that has to go back and assess the damage. Do you know that I have no knowledge of the SMS, the safety management system? I have no knowledge, I have no input. When I walk back along that train to find out where the derailment has occurred in that 2-mile train, I don't know what I'm coming to. I don't know if there's gases that are going to be blowing my way. I have no idea what's on that train. The training in dangerous commodities for workers is superficial. What it does, it tells where we have to locate those cars within a train. And so my comment simply to you is this: the system is fatigued, but it's not just the rail cars. It's actually the whole system is fatigued, and I would appreciate that it be looked at very carefully. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, and we'll now move to questioning. Mr. Mai, 7 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci à tous les témoins.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to thank all the witnesses for being here today. It's very important for us to hear what you have to say, particularly given that you've all been involved in the studies that we've been done, and you're helping with our recommendations. I'll start with the Firefighters Association. First of all, thank you very much for the work that you do. Generally speaking, I know that all Canadians have a great amount of admiration for firefighters, and You mentioned that there's such a high percentage who are volunteers, and that's really amazing. Thank you for that. One question that we have is concerning emergency response plans. This was a recommendation that was put forward by the Transportation Safety Board when we know that there weren't any before, and because this is a new plan that's being proposed, could you please explain what's happening concretely in the ground? The ERAPs, we won't talk about Lac Mégantic and what it might have changed there, but let's look at the future. What will these emergency response plans concretely change?
The ERAPs, we believe that the ERAP process, where we're going in future plans, is we are very pleased with the initial steps to the inclusion of not just crude oil, but the ethanol and other flammable liquids. We feel that the very deliberate concept is that if we can prepare for the worst, that we can be much better prepared if it becomes a product of lesser volatility. I think that one of the things that was shown with the Lac Mégantic situation was that most fire personnel who are trained and understand burning characteristics of crude oil realized very quickly that the characteristics that we thought we knew were not that of what was reality at Lac Mégantic. So what we want the ERAP process to do, and how we're so excited to be part of the task force as we move forward with the ERAP process, is to ensure that all flammable liquids, through scientific and data-based research that are required to allow communities to properly prepare and for our firefighters to have resource planning and training on their mandate, can have us in that process so that we can ensure that communities have the most information and safety process possible as we move forward.
I did gather information, really important training and resources. So, and you talked about real-time information, and that's not necessarily what we're talking about. What we're talking about is maybe for the municipalities and especially first responder to have all the information beforehand, knowing what's going to go on the territory of the municipalities, so that they're better informed, as you mentioned, information, and also know that they have the necessary resources in order to intervene if should something happen. So how important is it to know, because knowing that in 2009 we have, what, 500 tankers of crude oil, 2014 it's almost 200,000. So with the increased amount of crude oil going through and all the information, isn't it important to have the information, not necessarily real time, but beforehand, so that we know that municipalities and first responders are satisfied that they have all the resources in order to prevent something or intervene?
We believe that the information process for our communities is that there is a responsibility for emergency management training and planning, and that the information provided provides us that planning piece. In the event of an emergency, the real-time information, so to speak, would come at the auspice of contacting CanUtech to find out what's on that train manifest immediately, so that we can mitigate the situation from that point. So we feel there's a true delineation of an emergency planning perspective, and that's what the protective directive offers, in the sense that the information sharing for our communities once a year provides that emergency planning, so that we can do proactive exercises and planning for specific derailments. The real-time information, I guess, to be very candid, real-time information, if we knew the all products that were going across our municipalities on a daily basis, the reality is we're not going to go park fire trucks out across at various intersections just in case there's a derailment. So that real-time information is not really a viable option for us. We believe at this stage, we believe that a more comprehensive approach to the planning perspective is essentially what we're after. Chris, do you have any comment?
So that's why I was mentioning that it's not necessarily real-time information that we're asking. But also, in terms of just general comment, representing all the fire chiefs, do you feel comfortable you have all the information coming from railway companies, that you feel comfortable that the communication is really there, information sharing is really there?
I'm going to ask my colleague Chris Powers. Certainly I've done enough talking, and I'd like, because Chris has been a a great stakeholder for our organization on various committee levels, and I'd like Chris to comment on that, please.
Okay, Mr. Powers?
Thank you. I think we identified in the ERAP working group report that we need more data on information. We need to know the routes that are being used by the rails to transport this, the volumes, and the frequency. And this is something that we hope the ERAP task force will be able to achieve. So there is a gap in data now, but certainly protective direction that requires an annual reporting to municipalities is key to long-term planning. And so we don't plan for the emergency when it happens, we plan ahead of time.
Much time. Question for Teamster, and coming from the analysts, which is really very good work. They say for a strong safety culture is essential for a full and effective implementation of a safety management system within an organization. Another condition for effective safety management system is that railway employees must be involved in the development of the company's safety management system, be able to escalate their safety concerns to the highest levels in the organization without fear of punishment, and receive appropriate supervision and training to ensure that errors lead to improvements in safety. How comfortable are you in terms of all those criteria being met when we deal with a safety management system?
We represent 65% of rail employees. You've heard from all the other unions. Made it very clear today the safety management system doesn't exist. There is no safety culture. It is not safe shared with us. But to be very fair, you know that. Parliament has acted. The Rail Safety Act amendments are in place. They changed that to our involvement or signing off, and all components, all of these things hopefully will be in place. Again, with the companies saying post 9/11, a lot will have to do with their willingness to move forward. We're certainly willing to move forward with them. But also as a back check, the minister shall inspect, and to be blunt about it, that's why the direct line to Transport Canada was put in place. Quite bluntly, because if you deal with the company, more likely you'll be disciplined, as Brother Beatty said, and it will be not good for your career. So at this time, it doesn't exist. It will exist. We're asking you to move it forward quicker. The way the delays, it was delayed by the companies as we move forward. That's why we're asking to start the process now. We don't want to wait till September or October next year. It took 7 years to get fatigue manager, 8 years in road, which I work with. It took 18 months for the pilots just to continue, which I also worked on. They're sitting at the minister's desk. I hope she signs them soon. To redo their safety management system with our own involvement is going to take a long time. That's why we're calling for a recommendation to start the process now or in September, not next March, April, May, June, whenever the regulations come into effect.
Okay, thank you. And now move to Mr. Passetti, 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for coming. I guess I have to agree with you also, Mr. Bosanova. Not only the firefighters, but the first responders also did a great job at Lac-Mégantic, and of course made us proud. And of course the incident is unfortunate, but you know, these are things that we have to deal with. And I guess the way I'm viewing it, I'm not a regular member of the committee here, but the way I'm looking at it, it's either there's two things we have to look at: preventative, right? And I think we spoke a little bit, and what actually is going to happen in the case of an incident, whether it's a minor or major incident. And I'm trying to understand how you would view if an incident were to happen, because you said it yourself, there's thousands and thousands of cars going around. You're not going to put fire engine trucks at every stop or every potential dangerous place, because you can have a train derailed in the middle of a major urban center without flammables, and it could cause damage. So how do you react when an incident is going to happen in terms of accessing the data that's on that rail car, or accessing the first responders, or you know, whether it's medical people that are needed, firefighters? How does all that, in your view, get put together if an incident were to happen?
Thank you very much for the question. I would offer that much like the process for which has been initiated by the minister as far as protective directives and phased in approach plus data supporting the information and task groups and working groups. I think that what you're seeing as far as the Canadian Fire Service goes is much the same. We realize now that the incident was dealt with very well, but there needs to certainly be that preventative and planning piece in place so that communities can certainly rely on their first responders in providing safe response. And you are correct. It doesn't necessarily happen in the core of a location like it happened in Lac-Mégantic. It could happen outside of areas which become very, very challenging for resource deployment and or management. The 3 points that I offered as far as information, training, resource, sorry.
Because I'm trying to conceptualize. So a derailment happens in the middle of a large urban center. You call the firefighters, they'll go online, no problem, they'll figure out, or they'll be able to assess what's on that rail car. How about some faraway municipality where there is no internet access, or they're going to have difficulty that day accessing the internet, or there's just one person at the booth because the derailment happens at night, or there may not even be somebody there because that person is outside smoking a cigarette or on a coffee break or whatever.
Yeah.
What happens in that situation? How do you compare both of them? How do you make sure that the firefighters are properly not just protected, but have proper access to the information?
The information, and that's what I spoke about, that is key. The same process for a large urban center as a rural fire department operation needs to be the same. And that would be when the public realizes there's an incident that takes place, they phone 911. So when an emergency takes place out in the field or an urban center, as a first responder, our 911 is the immediate call, not internet, immediate call to Canutech to advise there's a train derailment on this line. Okay. Here's where the location of the incident is. Because we're trained to an awareness level, we can give information on the type of car that's being used, the products that are on that train. From that, they can give us initial isolation distances and how to react to that situation appropriately. And that's whether we're in the smallest community across Canada or in the largest urban center. That information sharing and the necessity of ensuring that these chemists provide that vital information to our emergency responders is absolutely key.
Okay, so what would you need as a firefighters association to make sure that all your ground people have the same service from one end of the country to another? Is there anything that's lacking anywhere?
I think that the training piece and information sharing right across Canada to ensure that every fire department is on board. As we said, the 3,500 fire departments, 3,200 of those are volunteer. Yeah. And we're dealing with situations where in some municipalities and some small centers that they raise money to put gas in their vehicles. So we're talking about a very, very diverse group of fire departments and very different resource allocations across Canada. But the information component, we want the CAFC to be a conduit of resources and training availabilities that we develop with stakeholders, that we can certainly be the voice of the Canadian Fire Service, to provide that information to everybody so that in the event of an emergency, our communities are safe.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Valentine, in terms of your presentation, so you were talking about your short haul people are not necessarily also resourced the same fashion as the long haul or the bigger rail companies. Are your members going to be able to provide that information?
Well, the members of our association are the people who buy freight services. They're companies, they're people like Canadian Tire and the grain companies and various mining companies. So our membership are the people who have the freight that is moved by railways and trucks and so on.
But don't they have a responsibility to make sure that that information is made available of what goods are being transported?
Yes, they do. And of course, when goods are loaded on whether it's rail or truck or whatever, that information is provided to the carrier. And if it is dangerous goods, there are the processes in place that the fire chiefs have talked about that goes to Canutech, and where necessary is available then to the first responders. So yes, they do have a responsibility.
And it's done on a timely basis, so they don't take weekends off or at night? not reporting what they're shipping?
Every time that a shipper puts a shipment to a carrier, they produce a document called a bill of lading. And the bill of lading says what the stuff is that is being shipped. That goes directly to the carrier. It's part of the whole financial process between the carrier and the owner of the goods to make sure that the carrier gets paid for shipping the goods. But it also is the source of information for the railway company and for Canutech and so on, where that's appropriate.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Butler.
Sorry, your time has expired, Mr.
Before you get a chance, I had a question for Mr. Benson. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Watson, 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for appearing today. We appreciate not only your testimony today, but your ongoing interest and participation in increasing the safety of transport by rail and our ability to respond. I want to start with Mr. Benson. Your comments today, I just want to probe it a little further here. First, you said there's no safety culture in Canada. Then later, you said there's no SMS. I want to be clear what we're suggesting here. Just to clarify your own remarks, are you saying that no companies have SMS, safety management systems, or that they haven't been able to produce a safety culture? I want to be clear about the distinction between the two.
Certainly by law, they're required to have a safety management system. What we're saying is it's something we don't participate in, we don't see, we have no knowledge of, there is no training on it, and as such, there is no because of the disciplinary nature of the industry, there is no safety culture.
Right. Okay. And I wanted to be clear about that because at one point I think interchangeably you said there was no SMS, and we need to be precise on the record for that. No, that's okay. You don't need to apologize. Dr. Fleming, who from St. Mary's University, who appeared here, did point out for the benefit of the committee that safety management systems don't necessarily produce safety culture, but they actually require a safety culture, which is shared values, attitudes, and norms with respect to safety. We heard from Unifor at this committee, and I'd asked the question whether they were surveyed, whether their membership were surveyed on a regular basis about their perceptions of safety. I'm going to ask the same question, Mr. Benson, about Teamsters members. Are they, or Mr. Beatty, if you want to take that question, are your members either interviewed or surveyed on some regular basis about their perceptions about safety?
Not that I'm aware of.
Not that you're aware of. Okay. I know that the Senate committee, when it was looking at rail safety and other aspects, pipelines and others, I note on page 9 that they had recommended that interviews and perception surveys of both management and employees is not mandatory currently, but would you recommend that be a mandatory requirement of their safety management systems under law, that they must regularly interview membership for their understanding of or their perception of safety within the company?
The short answer is yes.
Okay, very good. That's important for the committee. I guess we could get into other questions about whether you can bridge the cultural divide with respect to the leadership there. I don't know how you overcome that with respect to regulation and other things. I know that Mr. Vena was here for CN at this committee, and they said they did 1,000 audits a day, quote, to see what our employees are doing, end of quote, as if employees are to blame for safety in the system. I want to turn for a moment now, if I might, to actually, before I do, would you like to comment on the effect of S4, whether or not what happened in the upgrades to the Railway Safety Act are in any way changing the structural relationship or hold the promise of changing a structural relationship between unions and the company? And that by that I'm talking about the integration of health and safety committees with the company. Mr. Benson, maybe you want to comment on that?
Referring to the amendments, yeah. The S4 amendments?
Yeah.
Yes, I think the committee worked very diligently on that, as we did for several years. I think it's a real turning point, and we note that. And the funny thing, we're here talking about the past, And I think the future has great promise. I know that I remember meeting, I've only met Mr. Mongeau once, and he went like this, and he talked about how we have to work like a family. And if you look at Mr. Burrell's comments about how we're second, third, and fourth generation railroaders, this is something that's in their blood, in their families. I think it holds promise if the companies are willing to realize that this is going to be productive for them. It's going to increase public confidence to move goods. It's actually going to make money all around and produce a safer environment. And we're certainly willing to work with them, and we think the amendments are very good.
Okay. You want to comment on what is your union's position on the use of video and audio recording in locomotive cabs? I did ask that question of Unifor, and I think of VIA as well when they were here. I'd like to understand your position on that.
Okay. Thanks for the question. The industry did have a study and looked at it, and the decision actually, the conclusion was there was no probative value of having them. And secondly, there was also a justice opinion that in fact you couldn't go forward with them unless there was voluntary compliance. The company said that it would be cost $8 million. These are multi-billion companies. And they weren't willing to spend the money for TSB purposes unless they could use it for discipline. Notwithstanding that, we are moving forward with VIA because VIA is willing to comply, if you like, with the law and the precedents. And for us, clearly things like video recorders on hands only, audio recordings, 2-hour loops, wipeable, just like pilots, wipeable when you leave, for TSB purposes only, not for any discipline or other uses. There's lots of other things like not using it with their, again, we're working with VIA.
Summarize then is that you're supportive of the TSB's recommendation, which comes with certain caveats about how that information is used. I think that's effectively what I'm hearing. Caveats that protect our privacy.
I think it's something, Bill Rex, but I think something we look at and we have looked at.
Okay. Mr. Boissonneau, I appreciate, for the benefit of this committee, can you talk about, and maybe this isn't a simple answer, I just don't know, I'll be frank with you. Can you talk about how many different means of combating dangerous goods in a derailment incident we could be dealing with? You mentioned Class B foam. Are there other types of ways of combating? And what types of specialized equipment would be required for, either regionalized or national response for, in the case of derailments?
Yes, I guess
I don't know how
mention
complex
something
that is,
similar to my colleague. The easy answer is yes. There is a very diverse means of combating various types of dangerous goods and or chemicals that are transported, and that philosophy doesn't change whether it's rail, shipping, road, air. I mean, there are various types of
like, are we talking dozens, or I don't know.
There, essentially, I guess what we can characterize is that some urban centers, because of the reality of budgets and preparation and training and those kind of things, they are better suited to deal with a myriad of different type of chemicals that may be through. And some of the rural departments that I mentioned, and again, those who are fundraising to buy equipment and or operate on a daily basis, obviously, even Class B foam becomes a challenge for their access to provide a response to a specialized incident. So, I mean, there are various types of ways of dealing with incidents, and those sustainability factors, again, I talked about the awareness level, the operations level, and technician level. In many cases, there are those mutual aid support components from larger urban centers that would come and assist, and very much like what took place in Lac-Mégantic. But yes, there are many different appliances, different types of foam adductors, different types of water curtains. There's all kinds of different, and the guidelines, the way they're set out in that response, specific to our ERG or contacting Canutech, can provide that information.
Well, how much response time do you have, or what's the critical response time?
Sorry, Mr. Watson, you're well over. Mr. Komarnicki, 7 minutes.
Very much for your presentation, and a couple of questions I have is with respect to our firemen, volunteers, and of course many small communities like the one I come from deal with volunteers for the most part, and I liked your comment. You said preventative measures and planning should take place not during an emergency, but before one happens. And you applauded, of course, the minister's announcement regarding a task force to determine how to strengthen emergency response capacity. And it seems to me that when one is dealing with various capabilities, various resources across the country, that it becomes important before, and particularly maybe in the issue where we have in my city a transload facility, before one goes into a city, you generally want to be sure that you have an emergency response plan that is effective for that, and yet somehow we find that these do take place while discussions are taking place about response capacity. But I know in the instance I'm looking at, there were some issues about the water supply on site, and you mentioned that was a fairly important kind of a thing, and whether the couplings in the water containment facility matched the fire department's equipment was an important one. Whether the city had a water line coming in or not was an important consideration. They're still talking about that, but let me ask you this. The emergency response plan that the task force will be talking about, would there not be some objective standards where you would say you have to have A, B, C, D in place before you had a transload facility? What might A, B, and C be? And is that something that should be incorporated when you're dealing with various kinds of goods? So would you like to make a comment on that?
Yes, and there's no real short answer to this, but I'm going to turn this one to Chris Powers. Chris has worked on the Transportation to Dangerous Goods Advisory Council for over 15 years and has represented us on the ERAP working group. So I'm going to ask Chris to answer this question.
Yeah, thank you. The issue of the transload didn't initially come up with the review from the ERAP working group, but it certainly has been identified as a concern, particularly in Western Canada, because apparently there's about 80 transloads currently in place and being constructed, some very small and some very large. Because they're a fixed facility, it has a different connotation than the transportation, the rail. So if you look at a number of issues, there's zoning. What is the appropriate location for that transload with respect to residential development, what have you? Is water supply there? What standards? The Railway Association identified the fact that they're concerned there doesn't seem to be, and I haven't identified any particular standards to which transloads should be built or protected. So it is a concern, but because it's a fixed facility, I think we have to look at fire code, building code, zoning requirements to make sure that that municipality has the resources, or that the transload facility installs the fire protection systems to mitigate any incident.
It seems to me that before you place a transload facility anywhere, shouldn't you have some specific standards in place that have to be met before that happens?
Yeah, yes, I would agree. The trouble is there doesn't seem to be, at this time, any identified standard to which they're built. There may be. I've asked the National Fire Protection Association, who writes most of the standards for fire protection, to research that and advise us if they're aware of transload standard construction facilities and fire protection requirements. I haven't heard back from them, but this is a big issue, and some of these facilities are multi-track unit train type facilities, and these are where these products are being loaded. So if something happens there, you could have a major incident, and that is certainly a concern.
The second concern, obviously, if you had a standard, which you should have before you actually go into the place, assuming you had a standard and there were certain requirements, we talk about water lines and things like that have to be in place, who pays for ensuring that the capacity and the resources are there?
Basically, because it's a fixed facility, in most instances, the property owner. For example, in a building, if you're required to have sprinkler systems or fire alarm systems, it's a cost of of the construction of the building. So it should be the property owner, and they may have to put in fire pumps and foam systems and water supplies, as opposed to having the general taxpayers pick up the cost. So, you know, that's certainly a concern. I think some small municipalities in the rural areas where these are being built probably don't have the resources to do that kind of research and requirements. So it's something that needs to be looked at, and I know Transport Canada identified it a couple of years ago as a concern, but I don't know if they have the resources to do the research on that at this time. So we're trying to investigate some of the needs for that protection of those facilities. And
specifically, what is your task force doing with respect to these transload facilities as they relate to Western Canada and to not only the ones that are existing, but the proposed expansions?
Well, the task force terms of reference haven't been finalized, but certainly if that's one of the areas that is needed to be looked at, I suggest that should be included in the terms of reference as part of the work.
Thank you. Do I have more time? Okay. With respect to Mr. Benson, I know that obviously safety management systems are important, and safety values is something that has to be entrenched in the minds of not only the management but employees as well at all operational levels, and it must be displayed. And so it is important to have a buy-in by employees for sure, and any safety concerns must be elevated right to the top of the organization without fear of reprisal or any recrimination or retribution and so on. Important. It is somewhat remarkable that you're saying that we haven't got to that place, but as I look at a relatively simple matter, and that is the use of onboard voice and video recorders to strengthen safety management systems, that your members would object to that happening when legislation states that it cannot be used for any other purposes than the investigation of accidents and to deal with that. Now, you may say, is there a probative value to it? But most would say empirically that there would be some probative value to it that should trump privacy concerns that you may have. And why would you not be prepared to say, look, let safety take priority? And this is a good place to start. It's a very narrow issue. Why can't we cross that hurdle, notwithstanding that there are other hurdles to cross? And I know, Mr. Beattie, you were going to conclude and didn't have the opportunity, so I'll give you that opportunity now.
Second, it was the industry, including railways, that dealt with there was no probative value, including Transport Canada. That's not the Teamsters talking, and the privacy is the law of the land. I'll leave the rest with Mr. Beattie.
Sure. So first off, I don't know where that came from, that we're against LVVR, voice and video recording. As such, we've never made that statement. In fact, I have meetings coming up with the TSB. My own executive is meeting today and tomorrow to give a position on that. So we think that there may be value there for LVVR. So I don't want this committee to take away that we're against it. That is definitely not the case at this point.
Okay, thank you very much. We now move to Mrs. Moran for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour à...
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to all the witnesses. To start, I'd like to ask questions to Mr. Boissonneau and Mr. Powers concerning the financial contribution and material contribution of the owners of material and transporters to the ERAPs. I know that they are participating in insurance coverage, for example, but I'm wondering if there would be any financial contribution for preparation, for example. Earlier you mentioned the cost of training volunteer firefighters and first responders is quite high, and so I'm wondering if there's any participation from those groups.
Ongoing collaboration that we're using our association to be the conduit for the fire departments across Canada. We're working with various stakeholders to try and increase those training and information sharing possibilities. That is going to be part of this process as we move forward. I believe that any large-scale incident creates a precedence for which we have a duty to act, and that's, when I say we have a duty, that's everyone in this room. That's collectively
Moi, ce que je me demande, dans le fond, c'est est-ce que
But what I'm wondering is, currently, is there any financial contribution or material contribution from those groups? From the owners of merchandise that's being transported, from the transporters themselves? Are they financially participating in, for example, the training of first responders?
To expand on that, the ERAP process includes a requirement for training and resources to be provided. So that's why we look at the ERAP as a key to making sure that when an incident occurs, that those resources are provided by the transporters or the shippers of the product, and it doesn't become a cost to the local municipality.
Okay.
As in Lac Méganic, the foam came from Irving and Valero refineries, we believe. So it now, through the ERAP program, should be a requirement, and that includes provision of training to the first responders, in our view.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Now, concerning the ERAP, in my riding, in Lachine, in the St. Pierre district, we have a lot of railways that go through. There's a lot of transport of dangerous goods, and I'm just wondering, how are citizens involved? What information is being given to citizens concerning these emergency plans? Because in that district, for example, the only roads to get out of that area are next to the railways. So if there were to be a derailment or a spill of dangerous goods, it would be very difficult to get out of that area. So how are we working with citizens to make sure that they know what to do if there's a spill or an accident?
So the easy answer is the emergency management process is all-encompassing. So transportation of dangerous goods may be identified as one of the key elements within a municipality, because what they do is they go through a HIRA process, the Hazard Identification Risk Assessment process, and they identify probability and frequency of various issues. And flooding may be included in that, depending on location, tornadoes, hurricanes, and then, of course, the man-made.
Ouais, moi, je suis plus dans le transport de matières dangereuses.
But I'm more in terms of the transport of dangerous goods here.
That it's the authority having jurisdiction of a municipality determines what is the priority of that area.
Okay.
So I would offer that if some of the information is not getting out to citizens or within a specific regional or riding, then there needs to be a greater focus on ensuring that if a major rail line goes through a municipality, then maybe testing the emergency planning and ensuring that that gets bolstered is certainly something that needs to take place specifically within a municipality.
Je vous remercie beaucoup. Sur un autre...
Thank you very much. Moving to another subject, Mr. Benson, you mentioned employee fatigue, and I was very surprised to hear about the conditions in which employees have to work 12 hours, for example, without knowing when they're going to start again. That having been said, I didn't hear any recommendations from you in that area. What do you think should be done? How should this be regulated? How can we make sure that this situation is fixed? For example, as Mr. Ballantyne said, as long as there are humans running things, there will be accidents, and obviously fatigue is an important factor that we should try to avoid. So I'm wondering, what are your recommendations in that area? How could the government help to create better working conditions to reduce employee fatigue?
Thank you for the question. First of all, the current work rest rules came out of the Hinton disaster. It always comes out of a disaster in rail. And they were very, should we say, inadequate. The rest being left to collective bargaining to allow companies to have unique natures. And of course, as you know, the company's method of collective bargaining is to have back-to-work law. It doesn't matter if it's conservatives or liberals. It's what happens. Every time we go to collectively bargain, that's the issue, and it isn't dealt with. Parliament's dealt with it. In the amendments to the Rail Safety Act, the requirement is to have a fatigue management system based upon science. And I congratulate the government for supporting and passing it, because it's the most definitive statement I've ever seen on fatigue management in Canada. That's why we're urging to move it quicker. And the second part, we are working with the department now. There's a team put together at behest of the minister to try to address the worst components of the current rest rules. I'm hopeful that they will, in fact, eliminate some of these 18 to 20-hour days and get something totally unreasonable at 16, which violates fatigue science. But the minister is moving this forward. We hopefully that will be in place. In a funny way, Parliament's acted. You understood. You did your job. We thank you for doing it. Delays are just unacceptable. So for a committee here, perhaps to recommend that happens. And secondly, another part of that act, another amendment put forward by myself, supported by all the parties, was to give the committee a chance to review, at its own behest, all regulations regarding safety, and the committee read that as security as well. And I suggest in a couple of years or 18 months, why don't you have us all back and ask us specifically, how is it going? That's your ability to actually keep a finger on the pulse.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Very good idea. Thank you very much.
5 minutes.
Thank you again for being here this morning, gentlemen, and it was certainly very interesting and enlightening to hear your testimony. I just wanted to, following up on the safety management systems, and I frankly am very shocked about what we heard today about the fatigue management, the fact that the employees and certainly the people working on the railroads for generations do not feel like they have a part in ensuring the safety of the railroads and, of course, the communities and all of that going through. So I wanted to just, for the record, say that in our situation where, I think in our general culture, where if I, phone somewhere to get service, there's a recording made, or certainly on the airplane, there's the black boxes and recordings are made. Why is there this sort of stress around the voice recordings and to ensure safety?
Well, I think it's within the process that we're talking. If it's designed to discipline employees and move in that direction, then we're absolutely against it. If it's designed to assist, for example, the TSB in assessing safety concerns, we support that. So that's the divide, and somewhere in between that, there's a solution to this. So we're not against this.
Right. Okay, so just to be clear and for the record then, that it's not so much that you're against voice recordings for the safety purpose, but that you are against the use of that for discipline methods.
Yes, the answer is absolutely yes to that.
So there is a middle ground there that you have not achieved so far with this particular technology and the use of it?
Well, I think we're going through a process right now. I think very shortly we're going to be starting to deal with substance on these issues. So. Okay,
so moving on, just because I know that time is always an issue here. Protective Direction number 31. What I'm hearing from you is that is a positive thing, and certainly, thank you so much for your accolades for the Minister of Transport and the fact that we as a government are moving forward on ensuring the safety of communities and the railway system. Is that correct?
Having been around for a long time, and I'll say this publicly, is I think Minister Rait's probably the most qualified transport minister I've seen. She has an open-door policy with us. She takes her advice. Or not takes it, but she certainly looks at it very closely. Mm-hmm. And yes, on the new directives, the first part we've had a briefing on, we're very happy with. I'll be having another briefing with TDG on Friday, and I'm sure it'll also be positive. But to go back to your safety management system isn't video on a car cab. Safety management system, as it is in air, because we helped develop it in air as well from our there. It's about the complete how a company works, that everybody's part of the team, that we constantly feed back, learn from mistakes, fix them, correct them, move forward in a non-punitive manner.
Well, this is, I think, what's surprising the members of this committee is the fact that we have looked at this from the air perspective, the intermodal. I mean, and we're certainly, I myself am very shocked about the fact that this does not exist in the rail culture, given how old our rail culture is. In fact, it's one of our...
I can tell you a story, as I say, I'm a storyteller. When they were bringing it in air, I met with one of the senior bureaucrats who's a good friend and a wonderful person, does a great job, and I asked him, why are you doing this in air when rail is such a disaster? And his response was, but we'll get it right here. In a funny way, they have. It's a much better process. Again, you've actually rectified it. We're talking about the past here. Yeah. What we see today is the past. What I'm very hopeful for is the future.
But what I'm asking you here today, and I think that the committee members are all very concerned, especially following Lac Mégantic, is that why aren't we moving forward on this faster? Why aren't these things in place now?
Thank you.
And et cetera, et cetera. So I think that your comment about coming back in 6 months or 18 months or whatever that time frame is to see where exactly this is certainly something that we need to consider as a committee.
Thank you, and I really appreciate that, because that's clearly what a recommendation is to start that process. Don't wait until the regulations come back in 15. Have the force, because companies will have to be forced. We're ready to sit at any time. Is to have the companies and the unions come together now to go through the SMS, to go start the fatigue management process, bring the scientists in. Let's start now. So just maybe, instead of 2 years after the regulations come in, 6 months after, we'll actually have them in place. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And what's my time like, Mr. Chair? I have one more quick question. I am actually, again, very shocked about the transloads. I mean, that came up in a previous testimony in a previous meeting. And the fact that there are no fire codes, building codes, zoning, protection and safety systems. These should be standardized, one would think, across Canada. And so just again, for the record, I think I'm going to direct this question to maybe Mr. Boisseneau or Mr. Powers, you know, and actually all of you. Why is it that there's this lackadaisical sort of, you know, build anything as you happen across it, particularly since some of these transloads are very close to communities and don't need to be, frankly. I mean, you know, they can be better designed, put in, you know, more safe places, slightly away from communities, and with some kinds of coding around them, obviously, to ensure maximum safety. Can you answer that question for me?
I think we're in the investigation mode to try and find out. I don't want to leave the impression that there are no codes at all. We just are not aware of what codes. So when these facilities are built, and some of them are described as mom and pop operations with a pump and trucks show up and they pump it into a car and away they go. And other ones are multi-million-dollar installations. The thing is, because they're fixed facilities, you know, the extent to which TDG regs apply and what standards would be applied may have some interface or with local fire and building codes. So there has to be a cooperation between Transport Canada and the local municipality, because while it's a transportation facility and they're handling dangerous goods, the exact interface between those codes and regulations still has to be looked at, I think.
Very, very quickly, is there no committee looking at developing this right now? There's nobody looking at this right now.
As I said, during the ERAP working group, transloads was not identified as an issue. It was basically the rail cars and the movement of the goods. But it did come up at a meeting in Calgary a couple of weeks ago, and it is a concern with the railways, and now it's something that has been flagged as something that needs to be looked at. And so I agree that it should be investigated and some consideration given to it.
Okay, thank you very much. Now move to Mr. Sullivan, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. Recently we learned that it's not difficult to find out what's on the trains as they pass by, because it's right there on a card saying exactly what's in it. So ethyl trichlorosilane, which if burned causes death by inhalation, methyl bromide, which causes death by inhalation, are routinely running through the center of the City of Toronto. The issue that the residents and the councillors in the City of Toronto have tried to come to grips with is the public's right to know. And the railroad's response has been, well, it's a security issue. Mr. Benson, you're sitting on a security committee. Is it ever raised as a security issue?
First, just to be on the record, I agree with the firefighters, Mr. Powers, when they talk about the issue of the knowledge and the timing of the knowledge. What you raise is the side I think we're raising is the public's right to know. I'll try to deal with that question because it's difficult. In the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Act, unanimously supported by the industry, it was a great act. There was one controversial point. That was a disagreement between the Teamsters and Truckers Association on the need for security. Everybody agreed that there would be security required because of the issue of, sorry about the, I'll get back, it's a difficult thing to talk about. On the terrorism issue, that workers would have to have some kind of security clearance. And the Teamsters policy is it will be the transport security clearance. It is in the Act. It has never been enacted, or is not enforced in effect. It's the only section of the Act is. I would put it to you, if there was any concerns whatsoever about terrorism and the transportation of dangerous goods, those two sections would be enacted. As to the second part, I am bound by the Secrecy Act. There are things I simply cannot talk about in public. And I would strongly recommend that the committee perhaps would like to have an in-camera hearing at some time to talk about or maybe a few, to talk about terrorism, etc. I would say I lose sleep at night about our members losing sleep at night. I lose sleep at night about the lack of a safety management system. I lose sleep at night about lots of things. I do not sleep at night worrying about terrorism in the rail industry.
Thank you, Mr. Benson. That's good to know. So the railroads really are just trying to keep the public from knowing what's going through their communities for public relations reasons, not for security reasons, or at least that's the impression we're left with. The minister's safety directives last week are welcomed by all, and I appreciate that they have dealt with some of the problem, but I don't believe they went far enough. The Transportation Safety Board made other recommendations that were not acted on. One was to avoid major population centers like Toronto by routing rail around the city. And we have learned from this in this committee that the .111s are not safe even at 20 miles an hour. And there was no recommendation that these cars should go less than 20 miles an hour, which is what the public seems to be asking for, is if we have to have this stuff go through, because you're not going to reroute it, can you not slow it down? But in addition, we found in this committee that neither CN nor CP seem to have taken into account the abandonment of less populous lines at the time that they decided to abandon them. So we asked them, did you do a risk assessment when you abandoned those lines? They said no. So for Mr. Ballantyne, are you concerned, is the Freight Association concerned about the fact that there are so few choices left for the transportation of dangerous goods when they're abandoning lines in New Brunswick, when they abandon the 2 Ottawa Valley lines? So the only choice now is to go through heavily populated areas.
Yeah, that's clearly an issue that has come up only recently. I would say in terms of, especially in terms of the movement of crude oil and ethanol by rail in the larger quantities that have come up. Prior to that, while the railways have been moving dangerous goods for 100 years, this has not been, considered an immediate issue. But the railways have been abandoning lines for quite a long time now, certainly since the late 50s, early 60s. And in some cases, they were branch lines that weren't handling a lot of dangerous goods. They wouldn't have been appropriate alternate routes in any case. There are other routes that, in retrospect, maybe if there had been a proper analysis, that would have been kept. The 2 lines up the Ottawa Valley that you mentioned are a good case in point. The CPR second line through west from Perth through Peterborough and Havelock and those places that was abandoned some years ago is also another case where that may have been an appropriate place. So while it's really very difficult to answer your question definitively, there may be some cases where that would have been appropriate. I think one of the things that the minister's announcements dealt with last week was the fact that the Canadian railway industry, Canadian railway routes tend to be somewhat linear. So there isn't the same opportunities for looking at alternative routes as there is within the U.S. rail network. And therefore, one of the options where there isn't is to look at speed restrictions. And while The minister's announcement talked about a 50-mile-an-hour speed limit. There's also was provision in her announcements to that there would be investigation and through certain municipalities, obviously municipalities where there is large populations, that there would and could be lower speed limits as well.
But as I understand it, that analysis will be done by the railroads themselves. They have no interest in slowing down their trains.
I'd have to go back and look at the minister's, specifically what was in the minister's announcement. But my recollection was there was more than just the railways to be involved in that. If I could, Mr. Chairman, just one comment on the DOT 111 cars.
Quickly, please. Yeah.
That's a very broad category. Within DOT 111, there's a whole range of different specifications. And some of those cars, I think, have been considered. The ones post 2011 specification are considered to be adequate.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ballantyne. Now move to Mr. Tote, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I wanted to start with Mr. Benson and Mr. Beatty. You both talked about the second, third, and fourth generation of railroaders, and I'm quite familiar with that from my riding, which was essentially built around the railway. And I guess that just kind of leads me to the first question is, how long have the rail lines been established in the corridors they're in? And on average, there's always going to be exceptions, but on average, would you say, I'm sure you're both very familiar with rail history, have the rail lines been built, and even their major centers been built essentially outside of major centers, and that it's essentially the major centers that have crept around the rail lines and development has happened around the rail lines?
Well, the railroads, you're right, they're probably, I know for the unions, we're the oldest union in the country, so there's a lot of history there. And you're right, if you go back in history and you see where the lines were built, they were in rural areas, and actually the cities grew around them. I think that's a very fair statement.
Okay. So it's fair to say that, to say the rail companies have to be able to move their goods way far out of municipalities and avoid them, essentially, at one point in time it was that way, is the municipalities that actually encroached on the railways more than the other way around, if you want to be truthful to history. And I can see that for myself. I have historical pictures in my office of my riding, and the main CN shops there were completely isolated with just the odd home around it, and now they're completely surrounded on both sides, and houses being built closer and closer to them all the time. I think we have to be fair about acknowledging that fact, and we can't be blaming the rail lines for houses that are being built close to them. In fact, if they had their say, I think they would rather have those houses further away. So, anyway, I just wanted to also go on to the fire chiefs. The question I have is regarding the process of response, and specifically how you require the information from Canutech, what that information is, and how this supports the firefighters' response at an incident.
Thank you very much for the question. Essentially what takes place is we're notified that there's an incident, now be it through notification from a rail line that there's been an accident, or notification from public that we receive a call 911 that there's smoke, or whatever the case might be. Indication of an incident obviously comes from many different means, and in the world of many cell phones and everything else, that's usually the means that we get the call is through 911. So the initial process is that the first response to that location would indicate, if it's a train derailment, that most of our individuals, again, are trained to an awareness level, so they approach the location of the defined incident from a safe distance, and that's isolated through training of awareness level. They try and ascertain where, what products may be, involved and or indicated, and that's where communication centers start the process.
So how do they ascertain what products are involved?
Usually safe distance indicates binoculars and or the, closeness to the proximity of the incident. Again, you approach an incident upwind, uphill from any location, and there's various means to actually get to the scene. In more remote locations, like what was indicated, that process might become very much challenged. So if there is an indication of a identification number that's identified, when we speak to Canutech, then initial evacuation distances or isolation distances, if there's more than one product involved, and that's where those, if there's fire impingement, if there's environmental considerations like rivers or drinking water or whatever, that's where the complexity and scalability of the incident grows immensely and very quickly, and that's where we talk about the necessity for the TRAN manifests and the MSDS sheets availability being very, very quickly and needed very quickly.
So the actual TRAN manifest you're able to access through Canutech?
We are hopeful that in this process that will become automatic.
Okay.
The answer today is that information may not be available. In some circumstances it may, in some circumstances it may not. That is
so it's
a key
visual
recommendation.
recognition at this point in time.
Correct.
So that's also how your engineers would also be recognizing this through visual recognition, and the visual recognition, I'm assuming the firefighters who deal with it on a fairly sporadic basis, hopefully extremely sporadic basis, are able to identify and recognize what's on those train cars. That also your operators would also be able to identify that.
Well, you got to understand when a train derails, and you say there's some history to it, the train is like a snake, so it could be on a curve. The only way we know what's happened when that train has come to an emergency stop is actually go back and take a look at what's happened. And you can only do that from the lead of the train. There's nobody on the tail end anymore. And so you would walk back, and it could be just around the corner and it might just be a pull apart, and it might not be a derailment at all, or it could be a major derailment. So you don't know until you get back there what you're facing.
Okay. Just wanted to touch quickly on the voice and video recording for safety, but not discipline. And I understand essentially where you're coming from there, and I think most people would see that as a fair process. I do want to have confirmation though. Does this mean to you that in absolutely under any circumstances, even if it was very obvious that a very egregious safety violation occurred, which was an extreme danger not only to that employee but many other employees around them, that you would say absolutely that could never be used as evidence? I'm just, I'm talking about the minor violation, etc. I get what you're saying, but I mean I'm talking about an extremely egregious act that is very obviously endangering many people that you would say absolutely has to be thrown out.
I will start, and I'll pass it to Mr. Beattie. Our poster boy during the rail safety amendments was Brother McDavid, who was fired for not having his bootlaces correctly tied as he was leaving a cab to sign off. What you're talking about may, in 10 or 15 years, similar to pilots who have processes in place, non-punitive processes, upon agreement with agreements. We're dealing with companies who fire people for not having their bootlaces correctly tied. So I think when you're talking down the future, let's start baby steps, and what you're talking about is way down the future, just like with SMSs and everything else. But at this point, these companies, you've heard the stories and the grievances, they're simply not trusted by the membership. And Mr. Beattie, Mr. Beattie will have more practical responses.
Done already.
Mr. Beattie, please.
Very quickly, Mr. Beattie, please.
Well, sure. Very simply, the answer as we sit here today, the answer is no. We're against that simply by the history of how the railways are conducting themselves. But who knows how that relationship will develop over the future. So quite frankly, we don't trust them.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Braid, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our panel for being here this morning. Mr. Boissonneau, I wanted to start with a couple of questions for you. Please, thank you very much for being here and for the important work that you and other fire organizations do, fire chiefs and firefighting organizations do across the country. And it's great to have you and many of your colleagues in Ottawa this week as well. You talked about the importance of first responders having access to additional information with respect to the transportation of dangerous goods that are moving through communities across Canada. Are you suggesting? I just want to have a good sort of clear discussion on this. Are you suggesting that we need to go further than the current agreement between, or that has involved the Federation of Canadian Municipalities? And what are the gaps?
So, yes, we're suggesting that information sharing needs to be enhanced. There needs to be a more comprehensive approach to the information sharing. We feel that certainly since the Lac-Mégantic situation that there has been clear leadership and direction towards the necessity for that information sharing to continue and to be enhanced. And in looking at the future, which has been identified here, we feel that certainly there is an effort that information sharing will be a key communication piece as we move forward. But yes, I am suggesting that that needs to be enhanced and that the gaps continue to be at this point that municipalities do not have the information on a yearly basis up until such time as the protective direction had indicated that that shall take place at least once a year. We didn't have that prior.
Okay. Why did just curious to know why the gap occurred. I presume you were quite involved with discussions with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. What happened?
Well, maybe I'll answer that. I was involved with that committee with the FCM and the Railway Association, and you have to distinguish between information for emergency planning purposes, which is the protective direction, and it says that once a year the railroads will provide a quarterly report of movements, and that's in order to adjust for seasonal changes in dangerous goods. For example, propane would be a higher volume in the fall and winter, and anhydrous ammonia in the spring and summer. So that the planning process for the municipality in terms of what type of products present the greatest danger and the greatest volumes can take place as part of their overall municipal emergency plan. And the emergency responders can then say, we need to train based on these types of commodities and have the resources provided by the people that are shipping them. We don't start training when we're responding. We have to be trained before then. We recognize that there's going to be a time gap between the notification and when we can do the assessment at the scene as to what exactly the involvement is, the type of products involved, and get all the resources necessary. It's not an instantaneous resolve. It takes time to assess. So part of the awareness is let's secure the area, prevent as many injuries and deaths, and then come up with an action plan.
Okay.
Some of those components are still missing.
Mm-hmm. But given that there's little if no change to the types of goods that go through specific communities, aren't you able to train based on the information you're receiving now?
Well, once, as the Chief Bosno said, once we get this information, then that will be a big improvement over what occurred before.
Right.
And frankly, the big change has been the increase in the crude volumes and will continue to increase. That was a significant change that wasn't recognized by the municipalities to the extent of the risk that's presented, and now we know.
Okay. Now, with respect to the possibility of enhancing the type or the level of information, there's some concern about balancing additional information with security risks, or that information getting into the hands of the wrong individuals. And I don't want to minimize, others might, I don't want to minimize those potential risks. So how do we continue to find the balance if we provide more information but minimize security risks?
So I believe a key element in that piece is again, and respectfully, we understand those security risks as well. What we're saying is that we want to know on a proactive approach how we can plan for an emergency. As you indicate, even if products change at different times of year, there is an indication that those products are coming, and we know when they're coming. And on a yearly basis, we can understand and train to those. Again, the challenging piece for us is that training element that does not specifically blanket cover every municipality across Canada because of the diversity that exists in the Canadian Fire Service. With over 80% of our entire population being volunteer-based, and the more training, the more onus on preparation of different types of events becomes a substantial challenge for these municipalities to have a viable, experienced, trained emergency response group. And without the information and training piece, they're not going to be readily prepared. But that's why the ERAP process was so vital, is because there is a training piece that is involved in those ERAPs, which may assist these municipalities to enhance the training and therefore provide a better public safety aspect for that community. And again, they may not be able to afford that training piece, but that's where that relationship built and the need for the leadership for the ERAPs needs to take place to ensure that that piece is enacted.
Thank you.
Just before we go on to our last few questions, Mr. Beattie, in your opening remarks, you commented about conductors, I guess, on the trainer engineers, about 60 demerit points, and you didn't go into any detail. And I guess what my question is, like, demerit points, you know, for driving a car, whatever, you get 2 if you're driving 10 kilometers over, 3 if you're 15, and 3 for a seatbelt, etc., and for a total of 15. And well before that, you actually have to go in and write your license. So 60 seems like a lot, but I don't know how the system works, and I was wondering if you could maybe explain a little bit more about that and how that works.
Sure. So in the Brown system, the lowest amount of discipline is just a letter of reprimand. The minimum that you would normally get would be 10 for a minor infraction.
Could you give me an example of a minor infraction?
Sure. We'll say late for work. If you're late for work, you'd get 10 demerits. Or if you crossing a track and you stepped on a rail, you're not allowed to step on the rail. You do that. In the case that Mr. McDavid, he didn't have his shoelaces tied to the top eyelets. He got 10 demerits for that. So those types of things. So then if you did that again a second time, you might get 15 demerit because you've already got 10 for. So it would be progressive discipline. And then you get into more serious matters. We'll say if you go by a red signal, a stop signal, even if it's by, we'll say 10 feet, that can be discharged immediately. You could be discharged for that. So it varies based on the infraction that's occurring. Normally what happens is there's quite a few members out there sitting around 45, 50 demerits. So they're just on the cusp of being disciplined. And quite frankly, it's those types of people that will not raise safety issues. They want to keep low, they want to keep out of the limelight, they want the target off their back and just do as they're told. And that's where I think the system has its problems.
In that system, after a certain time frame and they don't gain more demerit points, do they gain them back? Like, do they come off of their total?
Right. If you go from the year of the incident, a full year, without any discipline, and you have to be an active employee, you can't like be off on holidays and so on and so forth. So if you're a year, you lose 20 every year, they'll take 20 back from you. Yes.
Okay. And just one other thing, you commented about you know, basically the trains never stop and that kind of thing. And I mean, coming from an agricultural background, you know, I'll have a $500,000 combine sitting there, and so in harvest season, I can't afford to let it sit there for 1 minute other than to refuel it and check the oil. And the same thing, you know, in planting season, you know, you got to keep that tractor and equipment running. So are you suggesting that the trains have to stop to address the fatigue issue, or something else within that? Because to me, you know, when you got that kind of money sitting there, investment not just in the engines and the cars, but the cargo that's on them, you have to keep them moving. So maybe you could.
Sure. I come from a farmer's background, my family. So no, that's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is when those trains are moving, that those crews they're alert. They're not physically fatigued, and whatever stress is put on them outside the issue of just sleep is minimized, We want these crews to be alert and to be efficient doing their job. So it's not about stopping the trains, not at all.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We're running out of time here, and I'm going to give Mr. Mai, Mr. Passetti, and two from the government side one question, and I think that'll take us up the time. Mr. Mai?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll ask my question to Teamsters Canada. You mentioned that we went from 4 to 2 crews, and then obviously in Lac-Mégantic we had 1 crew. Again, that's a big issue, but also with respect to fatigue management, I think we haven't covered it fully. From what I read, again, from great work that the analysts have been doing, so they say, for instance, according to the Railway Safety Act review, fatigue management plans have been developed and submitted to Transport Canada, Rail Safety Directorate by all railway companies. So can you comment on to the extent to which fatigue management plans are respected by railway companies?
I could deal with that. As I understand, this is talking out of school, but I understand when they went to do an audit, they asked where was the fatigue management plan. They said it's in the cupboard. They said, no, like, I mean, oh, no, you said we had to have one. Didn't say we had to use it. The fatigue management basically is a mixture of collective bargaining rules and totally inadequate Hinton rules. During the last cold snap that we had, the polar vortex, CN totally ignored the rest rules contained in the collective agreements and basically ran fatigue crews for 3 months carrying dangerous goods because the goods had to move and they had to make the profit margin to hell with fatigue management. Under the act that you passed, we thank you for passing it, that will end. So again, we're talking about the past and the future because under fatigue management based upon science, that nonsense can't happen. Go ahead.
Just let me make a comment. The issue of crew fatigue in the running trades has been litigated to the extent that we've had arbitrators awards, including the Canada Industrial Relations Board, issuing cease and desist orders to the company to stop violating those rules. In fact, our next step now, in fact, those awards, we've registered with the federal courts just simply to force the companies to live up to those decisions, and they continually to violate them, even to this day.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Passetti has indicated he doesn't have a question. Mr. Watson.
Okay, fine. Good. Go ahead.
No, I don't want to take his time if he actually does
Just a quick question. Just, Mr. Beatty, what would the solution be? 2 crews at the same time in the cabinet, or to avoid fatigue, or stop? You indicated that you didn't prefer that the train stop, so what would the alternative be?
Make sure that they're scheduled. They're properly scheduled so that they can have the rest and it's predictable.
If the trains are properly scheduled, you would feel comfortable with that?
For sure. It was one of the recommendations out of the Hinton inquiry. Years ago on the railroad, you used to be scheduled from the home and the away from home terminal. It's interesting that that's not there now. You're only scheduled out of the home terminal. We went backwards.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Watson.
Thank you, Chair. Returning, well, a couple of things here. First, let me just clarify something with respect to the emergency directive issued under Section 33 of the Railway Safety Act. Mr. Sullivan had alluded earlier somehow as if the TSB made a recommendation that trains should be diverted around municipalities. That, in fact, is not the case. If one goes on the website, you'll be able to read what the Transportation Safety Board's recommendations actually is, and I'll quote it for the record, that the Department of Transport sets stringent criteria for the operation of trains carrying dangerous goods and require railway companies to conduct route planning and analysis as well as perform periodic risk assessments to ensure that risk control measures work. So the TSB's recommendation was that the railway companies be compelled to do route planning analysis and risk assessment. They further recommended that in the U.S., circular OT55N or similar operating restrictions, they said, are necessary to alleviate many of the shortcomings. I invite anyone to take a look at the emergency directive pursuant to Section 33 that is consistent with OT55N, and the government has fulfilled its objectives in that. I further just want to state for the record that I'm not sure that the issue for the NDP is public right to know, but the ability of communities to veto trains coming through their communities if they don't like what's on the train. I think that's the real objective here, and if that were the case, then nothing would be transported in this country. I want to ask Mr. Ballantyne, I want to move to you because I have a question. We have had witnesses who have addressed the question of liability at this table, liability in the case of needing to clean up, for example. That hasn't been addressed. I didn't hear it in your comments, but I would like your perspective on this. We had shippers who were here, in particular the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, who suggested that liability belongs only to the railway companies. Is that a position that your membership share, or should shippers also bear some of the responsibility for the liability and not, in the end, taxpayers?
Well, I think the whole issue of liability is something that both the Canadian Transportation Agency and Transport Canada are reviewing right now.
Consultations, I think, are just completed.
The consultations, that's right, and we have addressed that. And the government stated in the speech from the throne that the basic underlying philosophy that the government would follow is that the polluter pays. And we agree with that. In other words, whoever is responsible, whoever has the care and responsibility of the goods at any stage in the whole process is the one that should be liable. And we agree with that. The owners of the goods, they clearly understand their responsibilities and where they are liable, and if there's joint liability, which there could be in some cases, that would normally be allocated, the allocation of that joint liability would be set by the courts. And the shippers generally agree with that. But where the goods are under the care of the railways or the truckers or whichever kind of carrier it is, they should bear the immediate the responsibility.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ballantyne. Last question to Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and also wanted to continue a discussion with Mr. Ballantyne. I had a question for you earlier but didn't have the opportunity to ask, and want to continue with this topic as well. In your opening remarks, Mr. Ballantyne, you mentioned that in terms of recommendations, you think that there should be more robust audit and inspection. In fact, of course, the Auditor General said the same, and we absolutely agree with that. In addition, you indicated that there should be strong enforcement action, including administrative monetary penalties. I just wanted to ask if you could please elaborate on those comments and what this might look like.
Yeah, well, the way the Railway Safety Act is structured, it encourages the Railway Safety Directorate and the inspectors that they have across the country to carry out fairly rigorous inspections. And I think in situations where the Railway Safety Directorate sees that there are chronic violations, then clearly there should be some penalty provision, and the Act provides for that. I think it provides for penalties of up to $250,000 per incident, and so certainly I would see where there's chronic violations, continuing violations, clearly that there needs to be some penalty, and it does need to be applied, and it should be applied rigorously.
But the mechanisms are there now as a
Yes.
result of S4 amendments.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, gentlemen, for being here today and participating in our study. Some great testimony. So thanks very much, and we'll see everybody on Thursday.